Proprieties aside. But what are proprieties? That's an expensive word that Dallas Willard uses. So let's look it up. Powder, pratique, premolar, prose, propriety. 1. The quality of being proper, fitting, or suitable. Fitness. 2. Conformity with what is proper or fitting. 3. Conformity with accepted standards of proper manners or behavior. So the idea is that Jesus comes in and he sets that aside. He says, you don't need that anymore in order to come into contact with the kingdom of God. Welcome in. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike, and this is Conspiracy Commentaries, where we don't do the word of the day, though we've learned a good one, proprieties, but we talk about Dallas Willard's The Divine Conspiracy, if you didn't know that already, which would be a little surprising that you clicked on a video or a podcast called Proprieties Aside. But, you know, there are stranger things. First chapter in a section talking about how Jesus comes into our world and comes into the ordinary, regular parts of our world where our life is mainly lived. And he starts talking about the kingdom of God, and people start responding in very, not dramatic ways, but very excited ways. Jesus was a very popular man in his day, and that kind of raises the question about the kingdom of God in what about before Jesus? Is the kingdom of God some sort of new thing that Jesus is going to start and bring to earth, or maybe it's already starting with him, but what about beforehand? I mean, he comes into a people who have interacted with God for centuries and even millennia, and he's got something to say to them. And, well, you know, what about all that good stuff that went before him? The section is called Proprieties Aside, if you haven't figured that out already. And it's a very important section, even though it's not very long at all. Very important to understand what Dallas is getting at, and can be a place, I think, where people who have studied the Bible, studied the kingdom of God, studied Jesus, can tend to be tripped up because of what other people say about the kingdom of God. So, unfortunately, it's a little short, but the question of what happened before Jesus is really the important one. And the answer is that the kingdom of God was also available before Jesus. But here, I'll read it. God's action, rule, governance, read kingdom of God, was primarily channeled through the official practices of Jewish rituals and institutions. All right? Kingdom of God is around, but it's channeled through, let's use the word proprieties. And proprieties isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I don't think Dallas is using it as a bad thing at all. He's just saying that there were certain activities, a certain way of life that was appropriate. And that was something that God had set up with the elders of Jewish society, people like Abraham, Moses, David, etc., in order to give them and the entire world access to the kingdom of God, or just life with God. So think of this like the post office. The post office, where you go to send and receive letters. And think about the Jewish institutions, the practices, what he calls rituals, institutions. Think of that as like the post office. And God has sort of set this up in order to help people. Now imagine Jesus coming in and saying, you don't need the post office. There are better ways of sending and receiving letters than with the post office. You can be in communication with other people without the post office. And there you have the contrast that Dallas Willard is trying to set up here between what has gone before and what he's announcing. It's like the title of the previous section, God's Kingdom Opened to All. So what changes is that the form of access to God and the kingdom of God has changed to a basis which allows more people to find their way in. It's not that the post office or the rituals and institutions were designed to keep people out, but they were limited. He says here, the rule of God, again, kingdom of God. Dallas Willard loves to choose different terms for things. We talked a little bit about how he translates the Bible himself. So the rule of God, now present in the person of Jesus himself, submits to approaches that were previously not possible. And we're going to talk about one of those approaches in the next section, but in the previous section as well, where Dallas Willard is talking about how all sorts of people flocked after Jesus. They aren't following protocol in order to get access to God. That's in a sense the main point. That's people setting aside proprieties, and Jesus saying, the time has come for that to happen. So we have here at the beginning of the section a word or a phrase, a remarkable change that had occurred, right? And this is the remarkable change. This is how this is how things change in the movements of God's work in history. Think about that idea of the post office being the way you would send and receive letters, to a situation in which people didn't need the post office to either send letters or to be in communication with people who lived far away. And that's the kind of change that Jesus is announcing, or at least that Dallas Willard thinks that Jesus is announcing with respect to the availability of the kingdom of God. So if this was helpful for you on the inside, for your mind, for your heart, then let that be expressed in your finger pushing that like button, and do subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll be back again with the next section in no time.